now that we've discussed and tackled the world of financial stability and insecurity in being an entrepreneur, now we can tackle the rest of the world, right, Darrah?
Obviously.
I am, to remind you, Elizabeth Schneider. I am a podcaster and author of Wine for Normal People, and I have an MBA and am a corporate refugee who has become an entrepreneur, and I'm also a mom of 2 little girls. Darrah?
I am Darrah, as you've just learned, and I am a 2-time founder and author who is blurring a lot of industries to design my own life.
Last week, we talked about financial stability, and we were pretty open about our foibles and our low and high points. So I think this week it does make a lot of sense to talk about the idea about choosing the definition of success, since we did touch on that a lot in the last show.
Exactly. Like, where are we going? Why are we doing these things? What does success really mean to you in a way that is differentiated and distinct from what the world is telling you success has to look like?
You and I, in particular, are very suited to this topic because we each, in our own ways, have a slightly devil-may-care attitude about what other people think. Would you agree with that?
Sadly, yes.
It really is true. Fully understanding and acknowledging that that is not a common thing. The two of us, I feel, are people that look around and say, so, you're the Joneses? Well, I'm a Schneider. Have a nice day.
Or the Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
Can I tell a little story about this? About the Kardashian type of thing.
I thought you were going to say about them specifically, like you knew them.
No, I don't know them. And if I did know them, I don't think I would. I think I would try not to admit that. Here's the deal. I feel like I had this really strange moment because, and it was around a fitness tracker. Did I tell you this story? I think I might have told you this. Okay. So my sister, who I love dearly, who is an attorney, and she cares a little bit more about what people think than I do. She was like, you have to get this fitness tracker. You know, it's basically like a Fitbit. And I am in decent shape. I go to the gym like 4 times a week. I've been doing it for 20 plus years. I'm old and I love the gym. So I get this thing because I'm curious. I'm curious about my own level of fitness. Like, how fit am I? And it tracks your sleep and it tracks all this other stuff. I put it on and I have it on for like a week and a half. And I'm like, oh my God, this thing is the most self-indulgent, micro-obsession thing that I could possibly do. I had this very strange moment when I was like, okay, I could do this as a check-in once a quarter to see how my fitness is doing. But for me to constantly be tracking this and then checking with my sister, like, oh, how much sleep did you get? And sending each other these things, I was like, this is so absurd. These fitness trackers, in some way, unless you're trying to reach a fitness goal, in some ways it's like, am I doing enough? It's so micro obsessive that I took it off. I couldn't do it anymore.
I mean, it's smart on their part. They're gamifying it and taking many of our competitive natures and pitting them against each other to theoretically help you become more healthy. But there's some interesting irony in what you're saying, because I feel like often what people say success is the opposite of what it was you were chasing in that instance of get more sleep and be healthier. It's usually the opposite. It's sleep when you're dead, burnout, hustle, grind. Like, if you're not working more hours, you're not doing the right thing. And it's this complete counterintuitive, killing yourself way that is actually what got me onto this mission of like, hey, what does success really mean to me? How do I break away from this definition that other people, specifically in this case, entrepreneurs, were telling me success needed to look like?
And this version of success that is painted, and we talked about this last time, about this bullshit entrepreneur, like overnight entrepreneur thing that everybody tries to peddle. It's just not realistic. I mean, look, people on TV are airbrushed. They also have makeup artists who are making them look different. And I think to a large extent, when you go to these networking things, I mean, actually, I would love to hear your take on this since you are the networking queen. It is such posturing. And you have to have a lot of confidence to stop and say, who is actually successful in this room? What is actual success?
Well, and to your point, it takes a lot of self-confidence to know that you are in your own skin and you're comfortable with how you define success and how you're enacting that in your life. So that when the person who will certainly approach you in any situation, whether it's at a dinner party or a networking event or wherever, who you meet or you already know, and they're like, oh, I'm just crushing it. Got like 30 new clients this month and I'm off to the White House and I have this Learjet waiting for me and I'm going to meet Richard Branson. And I'm like, whatever they're telling you, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, maybe it's them trying to make themselves feel better or trying to impress you because that they think might make themselves feel better. But at the end of the day, if you know what matters to you and you're working towards that, then that's great and you can wish them well, but it doesn't impact you and your self-esteem whatsoever.
How much of that happens at networking events? Like, what would you say? I really need you to put a percentage on this for me. Like, I'm just curious. You got to like put your bullshit percentage on it. Tell me, how much do you see of this nonsense going on?
Probably about half and half, but I'll say I've extracted myself from most environments that really attract that type of like that type of behavior, that type of person, because I have such like a low tolerance for BS, which is why you and I are friends, because so do you. So if I'm coming to an environment and that's what people are leading with, what I really care to lead with is authenticity and vulnerability. And like these sound like cliche terms, but like I really mean that. And you know this, that like actually this is probably an appropriate time to explain. Like when Elizabeth and I were first introduced, she had just moved to Atlanta and she's got this like really cool resume of like having gone to Chapel Hill and like worked for some of the biggest wineries in the country and has her MBA and is just like this cool person in general. And we get introduced by email and I was just like, yeah, like, I don't know if I really want to meet her. So I was like, hey, I'm leading this paintball event. If you want to meet me, you've got to come get shot up with some paintball. And she came and we actually hit it off, obviously, and loved each other. But I think I had become so jaded on so many of these people who I was being introduced to who were these really phony folks. And I was just like, I don't have time or interest in putting myself in environments where people are not going to show up in a way that is real and true and leading with vulnerability. So when someone's
like 6 months to get you to even meet me at the paintball. And by the way, Darrah got her holes in her clothes, paint all over her stuff, bruises on her beautiful creamy white skin. And I hid my ass out in a bunker and was like, oh, I got a little paint. I got shot. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I didn't want to get hurt.
I mean, the thing that's absurd about the fact that it took us 6 months to meet is like, I certainly was not so busy or important, still am not important, but like the fact that I was treating you that way is ridiculous. And I think I've learned my lesson. However, that's a whole nother time and place for boundaries and how you say yes or no.
I taught you that lesson. You could have missed out on all of this.
It's true. All this good stuff.
Here's the thing is that like I may be the person that hides out in the bunker so I don't get hurt, but I can be persistent in my own way also. And okay, so this wraps into this. This is I'm going to go off on a tangent for a second here and talk about success and trying hard. All right, I'm going to give it. Here's a good kid example. So for people who are familiar with children, today, in fact, I had my daughter. My daughter was the younger one was on a bicycle, and she had training wheels, and she was booking along, doing awesome. And then there was a little bit of a hill, and she was like, no, I'm not doing this. And I was like, you got to at least try. If you want to get to the end and be like your big sister who had gone around the loop 1 or 2 times, you have to at least try. But for her, there was no trying. And she was never going to hit her goal because she just was not trying. And I think that level of persistence, how persistent you're going to be, that has to drive how much success you're going to achieve. And at what cost, to your point. So I don't know, like we would not have met had I not been like, I'm going to meet this girl because I can't remember, was it Erica, right? Yeah, Erica. She was like, you have to meet Darrah. You have to meet Darrah. Out of all the people, you have to meet Darrah. You'll love her. You guys are going to get along really well. And I was like, fine, I'm just going to keep sending her an email until she says yes. But I feel like you have to keep reminding yourself that regardless of your level of success, like you have to push yourself in areas that will satisfy your curiosity and make you more successful in getting what you want. You have to push yourself towards that. And if you don't do it, then you're going with the flow, right? You're letting yourself be caught up in somebody else's wave. You know what I mean?
Well,
you're
I want to
with
make
the
a distinction
Kardashians.
there. So I think it's one thing to go with the flow and go with, as I like to say, like going with the current of life and letting it take you in the way that feels more organic versus swimming upstream. And I think that's really important to go with the flow in those cases versus the way that you're talking about it of going with other people's flow of, hey, this is the path you have to go down, shove you down it. And so like I remember graduating from college and being told like, yeah, you go to a top 20 school, you get good grades, you get the job, you get the house, you get the dog and the 2.5 kids and the marriage, happily ever after. And like that just wasn't the case for me. I lost 3 jobs in 3 years. Like I talked about in the first episode with money and stress around that. I thought I was going to foreclose on my house. Like things just weren't working out that way. I was losing all these jobs because the economy had collapsed right after I graduated. And I'm thinking like, what the hell? Like this is not the picture of success and life that everyone has laid out for me. So are you cool with us stepping back maybe and talking a little bit about practically, like how do you really begin to figure out what you want for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, I think when you hit this wall and you realize like, well, shit, the way that the world is telling me that I should define my life and success and values may or may not be working. If it gets to the may not be working part, like it was not for me, then you really have to think hard about like, well, what is going to work and what do I want to work towards? And so there's a few exercises that I really like and a few tools and tricks, and I'm just going to start throwing some of them out there. So here's the time to start taking some notes. One of my favorite books of all time is The 4 Agreements, one of the most complex and challenging books that I've ever read, and I continue to read it several times a year. And what it basically does is breaks down for you the 4 agreements one should make with themselves, like not to take things personally and to always do your best and to be, spotless with your word, things like that. That seems so simple, but when you really think about them and when the author underpins for you why these are the foundations for a successful life, it really gets you thinking and moving down a really great starting point on this path. 2 is a mindfulness practice. And I think this looks different for everyone. For me, it was years of toying with different forms of traditional seated meditation and ultimately landing on the format of transcendental meditation and also sort of interspersing that with just regular breath or mantra-based meditation.
How long do you do it for every day?
So I used to do it in the really traditional way that TM asks of you to, which is 2 times a day for 22 minutes each, which is a significant commitment.
That's a lot of time.
It's significant. And then what I moved into now more in the present is I do every morning for about 20 to 22 minutes where I will either do it with my Sanskrit mantra that I learned through TM, or I'll just follow my breath, or I'll start and create a mantra for myself, whether it's, my intention for the day or one word or whatever that is. And then typically end the meditation with about 2 minutes of thinking about what I'm grateful for to just start off with that recognition right at the jump for the day. And then I've even moved into a practice of journaling 1 page right after that, where I move into like a quick overview of these are the things that I'm most grateful for, 3 of them, and then just go into a flowing writing of whatever comes up, whatever I need to process. And I don't let it be more than 1 page. So it's not a big commitment. And then I keep it moving. And it's just a really good way for me to start the day mindfully, get some thoughts flowing, and then jump into what I need to get done for the day.
Got another question on the meditation. Yeah. So I have tried to meditate because I had a therapist that was like, you really need to meditate. Like, you are just so high strung. And it's totally true. I always like to say I'm a type A- personality. And I really do believe that to be true. Anybody that went to UNC for business school, 90% of us are type A-, which is why I loved that school so much. But I have an incredibly difficult time meditating. There's a really hard time staying still. I'm sure I have a little bit of ADHD. And a lot of times I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I have so much shit to do. I cannot be sitting here, Did you go through that? How did you get through that if you did it?
I did, and I do still go through that. And I think that's why there's so many ways you can do this. Like for some people, running or being in the shower and having a brainstorm or like kind of zoning out or cooking can be things that are similarly like meditation practices. And in other cultures, there's walking meditations and eating meditations. But I think for anyone who struggles, like most of us do, who have active minds, guided meditations can be really great. And there's a ton of apps for that, like Headspace and I can't even think of. Yeah, Calm.
Yeah, I have Calm.
I've always loved Deepak and Oprah's free 21-day meditations that they do several times a year, because when it's guided, it kind of gives you a place to go back to, which is exactly what a mantra-based or a breath-based meditation is about as well. That it's about going back to that one thing, and it's not about condemning the thoughts in your own mind. It's about recognizing them and then moving back gently to whatever the thing is that is your point of focus, whether it's the guided meditation, the mantra, the intention, the breath, whatever that is.
I gotta tell you, I have hit maybe like 6 or 7 minutes before, and that is like the maximum I can do before I'm like, I just cannot. I know it's a terrible thing not to be able to slow down, but I just sit there and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to do this and I have to do that. And I find it very difficult. I guess maybe that's part of the practice.
I was going to say, that is the entire practice, is quieting your mind and allowing yourself to be there. And it doesn't have to be for the amount of time I do it. Like there are 5-minute guided meditations, and that can be enough. But that is the exact entire practice. Like one of the things they teach you in TM is this visualization of, okay, when you start quieting the mind, they have you imagine this idea of, like, let's say elephants in a cave. And they say when you start walking into a cave, just right in the entrance, it's dark and it's quiet and it's peaceful. And it can sometimes feel really good and nice and you're comfortable. But then the deeper you go into the cave, the more you're kicking up dust, and the elephants are waking up, and that the elephants are your thoughts and the dust are your thoughts. And so it's natural that the longer you're sitting there, or the more the more depths you go into in the lifetime of your practice, that it can feel counterintuitive, because this is what happened to me, where I thought, oh, in the beginning, actually, it worked pretty well. But the more that I do it often, the less I'm able to go into that place of stillness and peace and quiet that feels really good and is the more addicting thing to continue to do, versus well, why the heck is this so hard still? But that is the entire practice.
Okay, so if anybody's listening and they are also having trouble with meditation, we can do this together. Maybe I'll make the commitment to try to meditate for, I think that Calm app, this is the funniest thing, is that I get a notification every day at 12 p.m. that's like, it's time to meditate. And they have 1 or 2 minute guided meditations where seriously I could just sit in my chair and do it, and I never do it. I'm always like, skip. I got all this shit to do. I do not have time for this. But maybe I just need to start doing that.
I totally get it. And I applaud your commitment publicly to do this. And I guess we'll be holding you accountable on another episode. But I think sometimes too, it's just breath work. Like when you're driving and you're on your way to pick up one of your kids, I think there are studies that talk about when you change your breath and you do 6 of that type of breath different than the pattern you're doing, that changes your focus and you become mindful to that moment. Or if you become mindful.
My road rage? Where will I fit that
That's
in?
a perfect time to transplant. But I mean, it doesn't have to be these long involved processes. Like it can just be like planting your feet and recognizing that you're grounded, and like really taking in your environment and the senses and the smells and the sounds, and all of that are moments of mindfulness that you can check back in and tap back in. And the reason I'm starting with these examples is because until you're really starting to center with yourself and identify what your instincts, your intuition are saying to you, and what your real wants, desires, and needs are, separate from all the noise that is coming at us all the time, it's really hard to start evaluating the next steps, which I'm going to jump into. One of those is what I kind of consider a non-judgment brainstorm exercise. And what I mean by that, and I'll give an example, is about a year ago, I hit a place in my career where I realized I just had this internal knowing that there was a new incarnation coming for my career, but I really had no idea what it was. So among these things I've mentioned that I started really doubling down on in my practice so I could tune into myself, is I started carrying a notebook everywhere I went. Even like I remember being on a train in Ireland and on a flight to Italy and like going to all these places, because I did this for a long period of time. where every time I could think of something that gave me energy, that I was excited about, that I loved doing as a kid, that I had any amount of envy or jealousy for in someone else's career, or that I enjoyed in what I was currently doing, I wrote it down. And then when I felt like I couldn't think of anything else, then I started piecing those things together in really strange ways in some cases and in really common ways in others, where I thought, well, what if I took my love of fashion and put it with my love of photography and my love of conversations, and then my not needing to wake up early because I hate that with this and that and the other. And like, what could that look like? And then let me scramble it a different way and leave this one out and do this. And so I started coming up with all of these different potential outcomes for what that could look like. And that gave me so many clues and cues for what could be coming next, that when I was on paper, I wasn't spinning as much. And it gave me this place to be creative, but with boundaries, which for me was great, because something that I know I struggle with, and I've heard many people tell me they struggle with, is this analysis paralysis, where you start to think, well, oh my gosh, there's so many options, and I don't know what I don't know, which is real. So how do you start busting through that? So that's one exercise. Have you ever tried anything like that?
I have not done that before. But there are certain things about myself that I am so clear about. You know what I did do? I did figure out that there were a lot of things that I did not like to do. I work much better on the negative side, whatever. Call me a depressive, but the neurotic Jew here. But I work better on the negative side, in the sense that instead of thinking about what are the things that I necessarily love to do or whatever, it is a lot easier for me to strike off things that I either do not do well, because this is another thing that I constantly tell people when I mentor them, is you do not ever benefit from pushing yourself to do things you do not like and you've never liked to do. So for instance, I am not really that great at finance stuff. I would never push myself to go into finance because it would make me miserable. It didn't make sense to me. In fact, it actually turned out that it didn't make sense to the markets either. We were learning about derivatives and all this kind of stuff in business school, and I was like, this is horseshit. I don't believe any of this. I don't understand it. I don't understand what they're even talking about. Through that ruling out of certain things, I realized that, you know what? I am an incredibly, maybe it's because I'm an earth sign or whatever. I have to have feet on the ground, in the sense that something has to make sense in a very practical fashion for me to do it, and for me to do it well. In that regard, I have always been, or for a very, very long time now, been very clear about what my true strengths are. The thing that I don't allow myself to do, though, is to have room to think about other possibilities for myself, which is, again, I think goes back to like the first thing that we were talking about. I'm so focused on one business, who knows what else I could do, but I don't allow myself that. But I know that I have certain skills, and by understanding what I don't like and don't do well, I know that the host of possibilities that I do have and that I want to do with my life, you want to focus on things that you do well. Does that make sense? I know it's a little bit different from what you're saying, but.
No, it does. And I'm glad that you brought that sort of almost counterpoint up. And it also really resonates for entrepreneurs in general, that when you get to a point in your business where you are very clear about those things that you are not great at or that you hate doing, those are the first things that you should delegate out. Like, I'm the exact same. I hate bookkeeping. I hate accounting. Those are the things I always procrastinated doing. And the second I could afford to do it, I hired that out so that I could have more space to do the things that I was better at and enjoyed more. And it's no different in your career. I think it's great to write a non-negotiables list of like, these are the things I have to have in my day-to-day career, whether it's working for yourself or working for someone else, and being really steadfast to that so that you're not sacrificing or compromising on those core competencies that you really need to feel successful.
Yeah, and you should never be doing stuff you don't like to do as a core part of your business, or as a core part of your life for that matter. I feel like true success really does come when you are doing the majority of stuff that you're doing is stuff that you like to do. I will tell you that somebody just gave me an adage the other day, which I thought was very interesting. She told me that one of her clients, she's a PR person, and she said that one of her clients says, I spend a lot of time working in my business, and I don't spend a lot of time working on my business.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're talking about this, it's interesting to me because one of the true pleasures that I have in my life is working in my business. And the reason I work in my business so much and work less on my business, even though I know I need to work more on my business, is because I actually love what I do. So there's that too, right? There's that element of when you're trying to figure out success is what does success look like for you? Well, for me, I'm creating a business that only I can do. I am the nexus of my business, and I'm not planning on hiring anybody else. I want to be a one-person thing because I love working in my business. So those kinds of success metrics also comes from the doing, from the understanding what you don't like to do. And then also then on the positive side, figuring out, are there things that you like to do that you've always liked to do that you've forgotten that you like to do? Because I think a lot of people, that exercise of the childhood thing, I think is so important because we lose as we get older. We lose the things that we have just adored when we were younger. And maybe, when you have children, you see these children just light up about certain things, and it stays consistent for so long. And it's something your parents recognize about you that you might not remember. It's a very interesting exercise. That's a good one.
Well, I love what you said about your parents remembering, because one of the things that I really emphasize that people do is interview the people who know you and might see parts of you that you don't even see in yourself. So that might be your parents and you asking them questions about what they remember from your childhood. That might be your friends, your colleagues, your partner, people who more recently met you. And there's actually a set of 9 questions that I wrote and published in Forbes, which we can put in the show notes, that give you a set of questions and a framework for how to do an exercise like that, where it doesn't feel reciprocal so that no one's fearful to really be honest with you. But it's questions along the lines of, when do you see me at my most powerful, and the opposite? And what is your wish for me? Or what is something that you know about me that you don't think I know about myself? And while you might be a super self-aware person, there's still things and themes that can come from these that you can suss out and say, wow, like that's a real hint, and I need to double down on that. Also, too, Elizabeth, you mentioned a few things that made me think of 3 books that would be really valuable as well for our listeners. One is Now Discover Your Strengths, because as you talked about, it is sometimes better, and actually in many cases or most cases better, to lean in to that which you are great at and either ignore or delegate that which you are not, depending on the circumstances. So that's one book that really helps you identify what those are and gives you some frameworks for it.
And by the way, that's something that school really focuses in on. So if you're especially in the early part of your career, I think you tend to fight that the instinct to go along with what you're good at. Because think about the very structure of school. They're trying to expose you to all elements of education. And so you're constantly doing things that you are not good at year after year after year in high school. And then again in college, if you have a core curriculum, and so we're used to fighting what we're good at. Now, hopefully we find majors, or if we go to college, or some sort of education that's going to help us maximize our best. But you need to get out of that mentality as quickly as possible that you have to do things that you are not good at, because
absolutely
there's no reason for that. Corporate America does that too. They just force you into doing things that you are not good at because it's part of your job. And so that's the reward. Somehow they convince you that the reward for doing all this crap that you're neither like nor are good at are like the 3 things that you do like. You know what I mean?
Right. And there's a difference between trying new things and not being great at something in the beginning, and just like really hating something and not being good at it, and there being little to no value to you expending your time and energy on it.
Yep.
The next book I thought of when you were speaking was The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. And this talks a lot about the working on versus in your business. And so if you're considering those frameworks and thinking, well, I don't want to create a job for myself where I have to be here for this business to succeed, or in Elizabeth's case, maybe you're say like, I'm a hairdresser and I love to do the hair, and the rest of the business are these other components, but I want to be the person in that chair cutting hair every day. Like, this helps you understand the frameworks of both of those, and hopefully helps you make a decision about which you want to go down from a path perspective. Because if you're not intentional about which you want to go down, you might end up on the wrong one. And then lastly, as we talk about how you define success for yourself, and I talk about some of these exercises, and I'll continue to share a couple more, is a book by two Stanford design school professors called Designing Your Life. It's based on a course that they teach, and it gives you a lot of really practical ideas, tips, and steps for how to do this for yourself. And with that, if I may, can I jump into a couple more exercises?
Of course.
Awesome. So the next one's what I would consider a deathbed exercise, or like a eulogy exercise, which sounds super, super grim and sort of is. But it really is this idea of looking ahead and really assessing what you value and then bringing that back into your day to day. Because I think when most of us really stop and pause and we think about, what is it that matters to me? And when I'm on my deathbed, what is it that I will have said mattered in my life? And on what will I be glad I put my energy and time into, versus what will I wish that I had spent more or less time on? It helps give you some of that perspective, because for me, for example, I hope looking back from my deathbed that I say, well, hopefully there is a deathbed and not just some crazy moment, that I can say I really invested in other people, and relationships were what mattered to me, and that I explored and I learned and I gave back. And so that really helps me on a day-to-day level when I'm thinking about how I structure what I'm building and how I spend my time, to make sure that that's really how my actions are aligned. So that's one that I think, whether it's writing a eulogy for yourself of this is what I hope people say about me when I'm gone, and or looking at this is how I hope I can think and reflect back on how I spent my life, that's a really powerful one.
It's a little depressing, though, as you get older. So maybe you can just think about if somebody dedicated a party to you. I'm a lot older than you. It's like, people I know are starting to push 50, and it's just, you don't want to, you might maybe don't want to write the eulogy, but certainly writing, if somebody was having a party, a fete in my honor, what would they say?
Whatever it takes, Elizabeth.
Yeah, that's unfortunately at this age, that's what it takes. I think that all of that is good. Any opportunity that you have to reflect and to understand to understand what you actually want is going to give you this perspective. If you're clear about what is going to be successful for you, and if you're not using other people's measurements of success, which, by the way, you're never going to get away from that 100%. I can say that I spend a lot of time not caring, not consciously, I just don't. But still, even I sometimes get dragged into the Kardashian thing, whatever, keeping up with the Joneses. I try not to, and everyone gets swept up in that. And I think that if you can try to forge your own path, I mean, we're really talking about, it's not just success, it's life happiness, right?
What makes you fulfilled? Like, what makes you light up and tick? And that's really the foundation. So for me, some of the Kardashians and Joneses stuff does align. Like, I love fashion and I love beauty, and those are things that do inspire me to find success in those ways. I love that. I have an entire room as a closet, for goodness sakes, and started my career in the fashion industry. However, that's an active choice that I make to pursue those things as interests and hobbies, and part of what I invest my earnings in. But I don't just do it blindly and thoughtlessly. I do it intentionally.
But you like it and it brings you joy. So I feel like that's the other thing. I think people talk about this a lot, is about bringing yourself joy. But it's not about impulse purchases or things like that necessarily. It's like, what will truly make you happy? Will, like, going on a hike make you happy, or having a cup of coffee with somebody make you happy, or will meeting somebody new make it, whatever it is, buying the bag, buying the shoes. The definition of success, even if it's a material thing, there's something that underlies that. Building off the first podcast where we're talking about, yes, there's a sustainable amount of money that you need just to live, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and making sure that basic need is met. After that, could success be that you help other people? Could success be that you volunteer? Could success be that you spend a lot of time with your dog? I mean, whatever, your kids. There's always this underlying, you need to figure out what your underlying thing is.
One of the things that people say to me a lot is like, well, I need to be famous, or I need more followers, or I just need to make more money, or they just assume that having nice things and the status that presents to other people is going to intrinsically make them happier. And it really, all of this boils back down to the point that we're really hitting home, I hope, is if you don't feel aligned with the reasons for those things, if those aren't genuine for you, then there's no use in chasing after them. If they are, then by all means. But this comes back to that comparison trap idea that if I'm going to compare myself to XYZ person who's got 1 million more followers than me, just for the sake of the fact that that's one metric of success for some people, and there's no real reason for me to be doing that, I'm not chasing that for any particular reason, then that's useless. And I'm just expending my time and energy on something that's a waste. So I urge everyone to just stop and consider, what is it that really matters to you? And how do you make sure that you're aligning your life and everything you're doing with those values?
That, and also you need to ask, what will fame get you? I will, again, harken back to, so you could be very well known and you could have no money and nobody really likes you, but you're very well known. You could have a lot of money and be very well known and not be giving anything back to the world. This strikes at the heart of the happiness argument. Success takes on many different dimensions, but if you don't take the time to, in your head and heart, figure out what the direction that is for you, and to your point, figuring out that why, unhappiness follows you wherever you go. It's just
it's like a cloud.
A darn thing, isn't it? No matter where you think the grass is never greener until you start watering it and making it greener.
Totally. One thing I want to transition into, if we may, is the idea of fear. Because that's the thing that we universally all face at some point. And when you start to go down a new path, especially one that's different than you've been on and different than your peers and family, let's say, is taking, fear is going to bubble up. So I'm curious for you, Elizabeth, like, where have you really gone head first with fear, and what do you do to dismantle it a bit and walk through it?
It inhibits me all the time. I mean, I think that is my number one constraint. I have to be honest. Here is a perfect example. I just moved to Raleigh, and one of the things I really, really want to do, the business that I would like to create in Raleigh, is that I want to teach wine appreciation courses to university students, whether they be MBAs or whether they be seniors. I want to be able to influence people and help people learn about wine before they leave a university environment and go out into the world. Because there's so many reasons to do it, but it is an unbelievable opportunity to help shape people and send them out with the right ideas about wine and about thinking about it in a good, constructive way, so there's fewer wine snobs in the world. I like teaching. It's frankly it would be a very stable business for me if I could do it. And I am afraid to reach out to the right people. I'm afraid of the no. But what happens to me is that I go back and forth, and I use this as an opportunity, this period. I always do this. I have a period of time where I'm mulling it over in my head, and I'm thinking, I really need to do this. I tell people, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And in some ways, it just holds me accountable. And eventually, I just, as my business partner, because I also have a wine event that I do like a couple times a year called Underground Wine Events, I spray and pray. I just sent it out there. Gotta love Laura. She's the best. You just spray and pray, right? At some point, you know what? It's never going to be perfect, and you are going to get no's and you are going to get objections. But guess what? If you send out 20, there's probably 20 universities where I am. I could send out 20, and guess what? I don't have the bandwidth to do more than 3 or 4. If 3 or 4 out of 20 bite on this idea, I will have a business that I will love. I will be so happy about. I wind up torturing myself into, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do it. They're going to say no. And then finally, I literally just one day get fed up with myself, and I spray and pray. And I think that, you have to, at some point in your own life, just be like, you just can't keep talking about it. You just have to do it. What's the worst that can happen? So somebody says no. I go through this cycle a lot, though, I will tell you. I am not as bold as I am in so many things and in my opinions and I have a really strong moral compass and sense of what's right and what's wrong and all this kind of stuff. But I'm terrified of rejection, terrified of it. And so
you're not the only one.
Yeah. So, do you know what I mean? But I get mad at myself. That is how I overcome fear. is that I just
Well,
get
which
pissed at
is
myself.
interesting because sometimes asking that question of what's the worst thing that can happen can be catalyzing because you realize it's not as bad as you're making it out to be. And that worst case scenario is probably not so horrible after all, and also not that likely. And it's funny too, because not really funny, but for you and I, our fears are so different. Like the fear that often holds me back is the who am I to do this? There's that 30,000 other people probably who are better at it, or someone's already doing it, or I'm not good enough to do it.
Do
And when
you
I
really think that?
oh, all the fucking time. Like that is the thing that every time I go into any experience, those are the first thoughts that creep into my mind. And I will never forget. And sorry, Dad, I doubt you're listening, but if you are, I'm going to kind of throw you under the bus and not throw you under the bus at the same time. But my first day of freshman year at Emory, I remember I had finished up my orientation round one, and I show up in my dorm room, and there are my parents nicely helping me get my room organized. And my dad looked at me, and sorry, Dad, but you'll agree, not the most emotionally sensitive or like doesn't have the highest EQ, I would say. High IQ, not high EQ.
Yep.
But he stopped and he said to me, I can tell that you think everyone here is better and smarter than you, but you got in here just the same as they did.
Oh, that's nice.
And I'm getting chills right now because that is something I always go back to when I still, all these years later, gosh, it's been like 16, 17 years since then, that I still have those same fears and apprehensions that no matter the space physically or not actual I move into, those are the first things that come into my mind. And then
the
the way
amateur complex. That's
totally
what my dad calls it that. Yeah.
yeah, it's this idea that I have to stop. And for me, the way that I move through it, one is just through action. That instead of thinking I need to get all the way to the end result, I just start making little micro steps to start moving into it because action just paralyzes fear. There's no time for fear when you're moving.
I do that too. Like I said, you have to just do something.
Right. But then
to.
secondly, for me, I think back to the data and I think, where is this fear proven right or wrong? And I can never find evidence for what the fear is telling me because I've never fallen on my face as big as the fear is telling me I'm going to. And so when I think about that, I'm like, well, the odds are pretty much in my favor, so I might as well keep moving. And the other piece to it is something that I've learned is that when you have a real desire and urgency to do something, that is a strong enough cue in my learnings and having experiences to know that you just keep moving in that direction and that that's all that I need to know. And that sometimes you can do too much research. Sometimes you can be too prepared. And that can be the thing that really halts your progress. So I have tried to find this happy medium balance of doing enough research to be prepared enough without it being the thing that makes me stop and say, well, this is already done and there's enough people who are doing it and who am I to be doing it and that person's better and I don't know enough and I'll never know enough to get myself moving. Because it's very much like the saying of if you're not embarrassed by version 1.0, then you waited too long. So get moving.
I think action begets motivation. I definitely agree with that. And fear is a completely strange catalyst. It's a good and bad thing in so many ways. I think ultimately, if you don't work with it, it will defeat you. Anyone who is interested in succeeding, you have to vanquish the fear at some point, or you will just wind up never doing anything. And by the way, don't we both know people like that?
Of course. But let's clarify here that there's a difference between biological fear, which is important and you need to pay attention to it, and these inner chatter voices fears that are irrational. And they're the things that are trying to keep you in your comfort zone where you cannot grow. And then there's absurd confidence, which is the opposite of this, where nothing scares you and nothing makes you stop and pause and think, which I think is also a bit diluted and delusional. So
God, yes.
we've got to find the happy medium here where you address a fear, you evaluate it, and you keep moving.
Again, it goes back to those people that we used to see at the networking meetings where we'd be like, really? Like, do you have no sense that what you're doing is really crazy? But it's all about being practical. And
real innovators sometimes are completely impractical and sometimes are the ones that we think are crazy and egotistical. And sometimes you need those outliers. But for those of us who probably do not fit on those margins on the edge on either side of the spectrum, this is advice to take heed on.
I would say it is the rare exception that somebody who doesn't listen to others in terms of like, or doesn't not listen to others, but somebody who doesn't heed the warning signs is going to be successful. Ultimately, as we're wrapping up, defining success, I mean, we've come up with a lot of really interesting conversation topics that I think we would love for you guys to chime in on. Would you be willing to do any of these exercises? Do you have any tools to uncover what you want? And what do you do to try to figure out how you're going to define your own success, or what will you do to try to figure out what you're going to do beyond financial success? How will you define it? How will you move towards it? How will you conquer the fear? How have you conquered the fear? I think all those things are really interesting. So connect with us on Instagram and we can talk about that further. And what other closing thoughts do you have, Darrah?
That's it. I look forward to hearing what y'all have to offer and share with us, and hear how some of these exercises are going if you partake in them.
We will look forward to hearing from you, and you will hear from us next time.